Hello from Cork.
Hello from New York.
It's Misha Moira Shanachie Corky. It's Maria, the Cork-based storyteller.
It's me, Jim, here in Fayetteville, New York.
We can't wait to tell you a few stories.
This is my first holiday, I think, in a long time, because normally people think we have one big holiday of a life, Jim, but we don't, because we're telling stories and it's our beautiful, enjoyable work, you know. So being here with my family, not having storytelling to do, is beautiful, but also it has me out of my rhythm of storytelling, and I miss my story. And my story children are back in Ireland going, "Where are you, Bob? Where are you?"
Oh.
You know.
Well, I had been thinking about a story for today.
Oh, great.
It's an unusual story. It's a Jewish story. And I was trying to think of stories that weren't known to Europeans. There aren't many that I tell that are from what I like to call Turtle Island, North America. I know many of them, but I don't have permission to tell a lot of them because they're indigenous stories. But this one is a Jewish story, but I know people won't know it, or very few will know it. And it's one of those stories where we get asked, is that a true story? And this is one of those. And the people in this story are real people. And as far as we know, all these things happened to them. So there's a little bit of a clue. And it's a Jewish story. And amongst these Jewish stories, many times there's a great Rebbe who's kind of at the center of things. And these Rebbes were unusual people. They had great knowledge, they had great wisdom, and they were often said to be able to do really magical, mystical things. And it wasn't their job, but they kind of had it in their back pocket. And so this story starts with one of those Rebbes. It was Rebbe Levi Yitzhak, was his name. He was in Berdichev. And it was during a very difficult time. The pogroms were really very active. A lot of Jews are being sent to prison, killed, and it was a terrible, terrible time. And this one disciple of his chassid, which means disciple or devotee, came to him and said, Rebbe, you're just an amazing, amazing person. And my family is being held on the other side of the border. I need to get them out because they'll certainly die if I don't get them out. So I need a passport to get in. And Levi Yitzhak looked at him. Now, this was a fellow who laughed a lot. He was a very energetic guy. And at first he wanted to laugh because I'm a Rebbe. I don't have any connection to the government. How am I going to get you a passport? And then he realized he was serious. And he said, okay, wait a moment. And he went into his office. And it was quiet. And he sat there for maybe an hour waiting for him to come out. And finally, the Rebbe comes out and he holds up this blank piece of paper. Absolutely nothing written on it at all. And he gives it to the chassid and he says, here, this will give you what you need. And so he heads out, he thanks him, and amazingly doesn't even question it, just takes it and heads to the border. Now, of course, the Cossacks are standing there at the border and he's coming dressed as a poor Jew, and they're already aiming their spears at him as he draws close, tell him to get away. And he holds up the piece of paper. And the lead guard says, oh, we didn't realize. Oh, please, come in. Do you need a carriage? We could get you a carriage and a horse to take you wherever you're going. And so, of course, he said yes. And they brought around this beautiful carriage and this horse and a driver for it. And he was driven to his family and he packed them all up and he made it back out. Everything went beautifully. And he went back and he thanked the Rebbe and he said, "You're welcome." And the story of this incident quietly spread. But nobody else came to the Rebbe. Nothing ever happened until many, many years later, during the Second World War, there was another Chassid of another Rebbe. This was the Rebbe of Munkatcher, the Munkatcher Rebbe. The Chassid came to his Rebbe and said, my family is in Berlin. And I don't have to tell you how terrible it is. They're hiding in Berlin. I know where they are. I need to go and get them out. I need a passport. And the Munkatcher Rebbe said, "Are you crazy? I can't get you a passport." And the Chassid said, "But Levi Yitzhak did one. Surely you can do one for me." And the Munkatcher Rebbe said, "I'm nowhere near the Rebbe that the Levi Yitzhak was. I can't do that." And he said, "You've got to try, because my family is going to perish." And so the Munkatcher Rebbe went into his office, and this time it wasn't quiet. The Chassid was sitting out there, and he could hear the Rebbe crying, and he could hear the Rebbe wailing. And the pain that he could hear through that closed door was just astounding. And it seemed to go on for hours. And finally he came out and he had a blank piece of paper, but it was soaked with tears, just absolutely soaked. And he said, "Now, this will get you in." But he said, "I can never do this again. This just took everything I had to do this. You can't tell anybody about this." And so the Chassid was very grateful, and he made his way to the border. And once again, the guards were ready to grab him until he held up the blank piece of paper. And they said, "Oh, we didn't realize. Do you need a car? We can get you a car and a driver." And they drove him to his family in Berlin, and they got them out, and they were safe. And the Chassid, you might have figured out by now, told somebody, because I know the story. Well, what happened was he took that piece of paper, that what's now called the Munkatcher Passport, and he hid it in his desk. And he didn't tell anybody about it until he was on his deathbed. And his nephew came in to pay his respects.
Yeah.
And the Chassid said, "I have a last request, and you must fulfill it for me." And he said, "Sure, whatever it is." He said, "There's a blank piece of paper in my desk. I want you to put it in my coffin before they close it up." And his nephew looked at him and he said, "That's not allowed. I mean, you have to be buried simply. Nothing accompanies you." And he said, "Oh, you've got to do this." And he argued back and forth until finally his uncle told him the story. And the nephew looked at him and he said, "So, okay, I understand, but why do you want it with you?" And he said, "Well, if this would get me into Berlin, think what it'll do for me in the world to come." Now, there's a couple things I'd like to say about that, but let's chat as well. And one is, this story, which is told by famous Rebbes now,
Yeah.
was told to me by a descendant of the Munkatcher Rebbe. And she told me this story. It's the first time I'd heard it as a family story. This is the story that was passed down.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, and this is important to me, you could hear this story in many ways. And one way you could hear it is in the faith of the disciple to the master. What faith does it take to walk up to the enemy with a blank piece of paper? But that's not the lesson that's important to me out of that. And I in fact, I don't like that lesson. I don't like that lesson. What it says to me, and it's not well formed, but it's along the lines of even the invisible has power.
Yeah.
Even those amongst us who seem like we have no power at all can change the world.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of faith in a piece of paper. It's a matter of being able to see what's not seen. So,
yeah, and there's something very shifting in the paradigm about that gentle story that's really important, it feels to me, and needed in today's world, because we can feel there's only one road that we're all going down, and we're being led down that road. And it reminds me of that very famous story of the black wolf and the white wolf, and both of them live within us.
right.
And which one survives? The one you feed. So this is a feeding story. And for me, it's very much of the vein of your legacy story. It's one of these stories that you want to leave behind you when you leave this world. And it's even in the story. That bit is even in the story. So I loved it, and it feels like a needed story. So thank you for that story today.
Thank you.
It was amazing, I was just going to ask you, you said that there was other things that you'd like to share about the story. So I was going to come back to that and say, what else would you like to tell us about that story?
Well, so my teacher's teacher, whose
I
name
love
is,
that.
my teacher's teacher, Shlomo Carlebach of blessed memory, he tells this story.
Yeah.
And I found it in his telling after I had learned it.
Yeah.
And he ends up telling it to say, and I'm going to try and catch his meaning clearly, that we have Munkatcher passports between us.
Yes.
We have, and he was talking about a couple, but he meant everyone, that we have exchanges that are without words or without concrete manifestation.
And without transaction. Yeah.
That's right. And what we have to do is see those unseen things that someone offers us and welcome them in.
Yes. So I have a beautiful example of that popped up on my Insta today. And I would love my Facebook and Instagram to always have this kind of stuff on them. There was a woman who had been away from Ireland for a number of years, more than 20, and she arrived to a supermarket, and she went up to the machine to pay her parking, and a woman rushed up to her and she said, "There's 30 minutes left on my parking ticket. Would you like it?" She says, "Would 30 minutes be enough for you?" And she said, "Thanks very much." And in gratitude, she put it out there into cyberspace. And I thought, what a beautiful thing, that if we could do something gentle and, connecting like that between us on a daily basis, what a lovely world this would be.
It's really, there's, I think, wonderful, and it happens to be a popular term now about living in a state of abundance. And it's not that you have a lot of things, but that you're so ready to give what you have to someone else. And that's what makes it abundant. So that's a beautiful story in my mind of abundance. Yeah.
Like I remember hearing when I was in Canada, real wealth is having stuff enough to give away.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think it comes from the First Nations people.
It does.
Like,
it does.
Yeah. So I love that, and I've been saying that ever since I came home from Nova Scotia, what a lovely thought. Yeah.
Well, there's another a parallel saying, again, I'm sure it's a different nation, but still a First Nation. They don't have a word for garbage.
Yeah.
Because nothing is ever thrown away.
Yeah.
Everything is used in one way or another, even if it's just fertilizer. There's no such thing as trash or garbage or anything like that. Yeah.
And we're struggling back towards that kind of stasis,
Yeah.
May it happen, So, and of course, as I was listening to your story, I was thinking all my stories are at home in Ireland, waiting for me to come back during this holiday. But as you were talking, a story came up in me, and it is the story of Muirne Muncháem. And she was the woman that carried the very famous Finn Mac Cumhaill. So this would have gone back to when she was a young woman, before, as they would say, he was a glint in his father's eye. So she finds herself, the situation where this story starts. Of course, her story starts long before this, but the story starts where she is a beloved and well-minded mistress of the cash lawn of the castle, and her husband, Cumhaill, because it was Finn Mac Cumhaill, it was Fionn, son of Cumhaill. He has been invited out to a battle, but they have laws, and they believe that these laws will be upheld. But on this occasion, that didn't happen, and her husband and a load of their leaders were killed in a skirmish that they were not prepared for, because they were going to have parley. They were going to talk amongst one another. So she fled, and she has a fur coat over her, and she's got a dagger in her belt, and she has been a princess, Jim. I mean, she has been reared to complete gentility, and she's making her way across the Irish tundra, with these big, massive trees, and in between them, these expanses of marsh and bog that would suck you in and make you into a bog person, to be discovered 2,000 years down the road and to be put into a museum. So she's picking her way across this. And because she is pregnant, she's very heavy with child. Her intuition is really up. And because she knows that she has the seed of her people in her belly, and her name is the flower of Avu. That's her nickname, because she knows that the flower of the manhood has been cut down in its prime, and that everything depends on what she has in her stomach. She makes her way across this place, walking when she's not used to walking, full of muck when she's used to being bathed every day, and all she has is her determination. And she comes to a clearing where there is grass and there is a big grey rock. And she decides to sit up on that rock just for a little rest. And she's sitting up on the rock and she's surveying everything. And she feels the air become electric. And she hears that the birds stop singing. And everything in her becomes alert. And her hair crawls up the back of her head as every hair on her arm stands, and her breathing becomes shallow, and she knows that she is being pursued. She allows her eyes to go very slowly and carefully along the landscape And there she sees a pair of golden eyes looking back at her from grey fur. And it is a she-mock pira. It is a she-wolf. And everything in the she-wolf is pointed towards her, from the tip of its nose to the extension of its tail. And every hair on the back of its neck is standing up. And she knows in this moment it is her and her baby against the survival of the wolf, who is lean and hasn't eaten in a long time. And she casts her eyes towards the trees. They seem very, very far away. And she casts her eyes towards the wolf. And she thinks, if I run now, will I make the trees before the wolf makes me? And something ancient and guttural fills her soul. And she comes to a standing position, and she pulls out the dagger from her waist, and she sticks it on top of the staff that she's been carrying to make it look as long as possible, as if it is a lance. And she puts it over her shoulder, and she makes her eyes as mad as she can possibly make them. And she makes her voice as crazy as it can possibly sound. And she says, "You are me, wolf. You are me, and it's not going to be me." And the wolf looks at her, and he puts his head down further, and it kind of takes 2 or 3 steps back. And she thinks, in this moment, that wolf believes, I am bigger than it. I am bigger than its life, but it will come for me. And even though she's exhausted, she comes down from the rock, and she looks once more at the wolf. And then she turns to let the wolf know that she is not afraid, and she is not keeping eye contact with the wolf. And she begins to march. And she can feel the baby in her belly, and she can feel that the time is near, but she keeps going. And she reaches the edge of the forest, and she breathes a sigh of relief. And she looks up to the branches, and she wonders, if she had to climb, would she be able to climb now to get away from the wolf? And she keeps traveling all that night and all the following day, until she comes to the lists of her sister-in-law, Bavel Ua Bushkna. Now herself and Bavel, they have not parted on good terms. And Bavel has a knowing. Bavel can see the light in people. And she happens to be standing on the wall. And she sees the light of her sister coming. And it wavers like a candle. But at the base of the candle, there is this yellow, searing light, the light of her nephew, who has lost his father, Cumhaill. And she runs out, and Muirne, she falls into her arms, and she drags her backwards towards the lists. And just as they get in through the door, all you can hear is, "Ow!" But she is safe now in the arms of her. That is my story, the first ever telling to you, Jim.
Oh, what a compelling story. And of course the images are right there. So beautiful. To think of the strength she had to summon in order to do that.
Yeah, and to step outside her role, which is like your story, this man who would be so gentle and would be so looking at the texts and bringing, kind of the beauty of the faith in, and then having to step outside of that with a piece of paper and all his faith, That's what brought it up to me, because she had to step outside her role, and with all her faith. And she was the last one. And this seed was going to be the seed of
Mm-hmm.
the Fianna, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She just marched on. Yeah.
And I love the sister, the aunts being able to see the spirit there, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful.
That was her gift, to be able to see the life light and the color of the light, you know, the color of the souls, that she was seeing. Yeah.
Well, that reminds me of a story.
Yay! I love the red thread of story.
And my teacher, Yitzhak Buxbaum, also blessed memory, this was, I don't think I've told this story in a very long time. This was one of his signature stories. And he had absolutely fallen in love with it. It's a story about the Baal Shem Tov and how, what he would often do is take these midnight rides in his carriage with some disciples in the carriage. And they would go wherever, and there were lots of magical journeys. But on this occasion, it was the middle of winter, in the cold of the Ukraine, which is where he lived. And they were riding along this road that was completely desolate. They entered into a clearing, and the horses started to get nervous. And they went a little further into the center of the clearing, and the horses stopped dead. They wouldn't move. Everybody looked outside of the carriage, and they saw that they were surrounded by pairs of eyes all around. Wolves. Wolves. Too many wolves to even think of what they could do. And one pair of eyes that was higher than the rest started to approach slowly. And they realized this was the Rebbe of the wolves. And so the disciples are, what are we going to do? And Baal Shem Tov simply stepped out of the carriage and started walking towards the wolf. And they were terrified. He didn't have a knife. He didn't have any weapon. And what did he do? He slowly opened up his outer jacket. And then he opened up the jacket beneath that. And then he opened up the shirt that was beneath that. And then he pulled up his last shirt until his chest was bare. The Rebbe of the Wolves came and put his paws on his shoulders and touched his cool nose to the Baal Shem Tov's heart and waited. And after a while, he let go of the Baal Shem Tov. He touched his head to the ground, and he turned around and he left. And the wolves left with him. The Baal Shem Tov starts walking back to his carriage, buttoning up against the cold. And the disciples were, what just happened? For someone who has no hate or fear or anger in their heart, animals will see that and respect that. And so I showed him who I was. Now, when Yitzhak told this story, he followed it up. He had gone, and I cannot imagine this. I mean, I can, but it's just so bizarre. Here's this little guy from Brooklyn who somehow made his way to a rodeo. I can't imagine how that happened, but here he was at a rodeo. Why he would go, makes no sense to me. But as part of the show, there was a fellow who came and sat in the center of the arena. And he did just that. He opened his shirt, and a wolf would come and sniff his shirt and his heart and go away.
Yeah.
And he had to then talk to this man. And he told him that this was not a trained wolf. This was just a regular wolf. They exchanged their stories about how wolves and humans interact.
Yeah.
And this was, again, one of those stories that people say, is it true?
Yeah.
And
I believe that one is totally true.
Yeah.
And I've heard many stories like that here in Ireland as well, and there's a story, they call people of the knowing, and often it's the traveling people,
Sure.
So they'd say, kind of Moira of the knowing, Mary of the knowing, Sean of the knowing, John of the knowing,
Right.
And there's a beautiful, beautiful true life story. I was discussing this with Vincent, who's a storyteller from Tipperary, and he told me that as a young child, he watched a beautiful docile horse that they all had a stake in. So the neighbours had all bought a bit of him, and they used to be joking about, oh, I own his left cheek, or I own his right knee, or,
Right.
they'd be joking like that. And the horse was beginning to win at the point of points. And they came out one day and he was throwing himself around the field. And Vince said the nearest thing he ever saw to it was, kind of mad cow disease.
Mm-hmm.
And they called the vet, and the vet stood inside the gate, and he was like, oh, there's something after getting into his brain, and I'll have to put the horse down. And this would have been a good many years ago, 1920s, 30s, that way, And the father said, fine, but he said, we all own a bit of him, so you'll have to wait for 24 hours. And he said, that's cruel to that animal, the vet, And he said, well, you'll just have to come back tomorrow. And when he was gone, he said, go down and get the travelling man, go down and get the travelling man. And he came up and he walked into the field, and he just put his hands very slowly wider and wider. And he walked in slow motion towards this crazed horse. And as he walked, the horse became calmer, until eventually the horse became still. And the man was still, and he was walking up towards him with his arms out. And when he got there, he put his face to the face of the horse, his cheek to the apple of the cheek of the horse. And it looked as if they were slow dancing. And then he waited for a minute, and very slowly he took his head away and he moved it to the other cheek, and he put the apple of his cheek to the cheek of the horse. And when he was finished doing that, he asked for pliers and some bran mash and some whiskey. And what he had found from the heat of the cheek of the horse was that the horse had an abscess. And when he poured the abscess, the horse was as docile as ever it was. And they gave that young vet some jip, So like there is something about trust, and there is something about belief, when it comes to animals. And I've seen it with my own eyes, I've seen, kind of how animals can connect and step out of their role as well. Because we have a role, but they have the role of like, come for me and I'll get you first. There is a bit of that in big animals. But if you can say, but I'm not afraid and I want to connect, and my own brother, who I'm here with now, because he's 60, he's always had a way with animals. He came in one day and he was like shaking, and my mother said, what's going on with you? And he opened his duffel coat, and inside there was a baldy crow. The crow was pink. There wasn't a feather left on it. And we called that crow Dawsy. And he learned how to force feed, like, the way you have to feed a baby bird. It to us it looks cruel. So he put something on the end of a stick, and he'd, put it down his throat. And he blossomed, like, and his feathers came back. And, so like even as a very young child, I could see if you could put your fear aside, you could really connect with animals. And I saw that through the brother that I'm here with at the moment. Yeah.
One of the things that I do is I'm a end-of-life doula, a death doula.
Yeah.
And so I had this one opportunity. I was visiting a woman who was at the end of her life and in a fair amount of pain. And she was living with her daughter in a very tiny apartment. It was a really tiny place.
Yeah.
And the woman was in their tiny living room, sitting in a chair. She wouldn't take the hospital bed. She didn't want that. She had this recliner she was in. And so there was a single couch, and the daughter was sitting there. And they said, would you please give my mother some Reiki, some energy healing for the pain? I said, sure, that's part of what I do. And I said to them, do you know what Reiki is? They didn't know anything about it. And so, as I normally would do, I started to explain what it is and how it works. And that's part of the beginning, as you start to speak slowly and, you get them in the receptive mode. And as we're just about ready to start, there's a knock on the front door. Well, the front door opens into this room. I mean, it's a tiny, tiny little place. And so the daughter goes up to get the door, and it's the neighbor. And the neighbor said, I wanted to come and visit, and I just had a feeling that now is a good time I should come and visit. And I said, well, we're about to do some Reiki. Would you like to join us? Because it doesn't have to go to one person. It can go to the whole group. And she said, oh, yeah. So I start explaining it again, and we're just about ready to begin. And there's another knock on the door. And it's her nephew from 2 hours away who was just compelled to come and visit at that moment. So once again, now we've got 4 people in this little room. The 2 of them are on the couch. One's on the recliner. The nephew is on the hospital bed, and the room is full. There's me. And I said, okay, here's what it is. Let's get ready to start. And all of a sudden I hear the pitter patter of little feet. And in walks a dog from the other room, rolls over on its back, throws its legs open, and is clearly ready to receive. And it was just the most amazing moment of that sort I've ever had. But yeah, this dog just knew.
Yes, absolutely. And as we say here, no accidents. And I know you say that in your faith as well.
Yeah.
So that was a meant to be moment, So we were talking about I do this threading and weaving workshop, and I say sometimes things open between you and you start having the same threads, The most amazing version of that ever happened was when I was running a workshop for the CVN, the Creative Voice Network in UCC, which primarily started for people who are hearing voices. So when you're running the workshop, you don't know if you have psychiatrists, doctors, family members, or somebody who's hearing voices.
Right.
So we're sitting there and I'm giving the instruction and I'm saying, clear your mind now and think of a character. And everybody thought of the same character. And the character was Father Time. And he had a long white beard and he was wearing a long white shirt, and everybody had the same description and the same character in their head. And then we went on, I collected all the threads first. And so the next thread was, well, what environment are they in? And they said, well, he's out in the desert and he's at the edge of a cliff. And as he looks over the edge of the cliff, he sees this very strong branch and it's holding up a nest. And in the nest, there's 2 eggs. And there's an eagle flying in. And the eagle is obviously, responsible for this nest and for these eggs. And then Father Time has a terrible accident and he falls off the cliff and he falls into the nest. So I'm collecting the threads and I'm asking people. And the first person said, oh, well, my character is Father Time. And everybody in the room goes, because it was their character as well.
Right.
So I said, isn't that amazing? That's never happened to this extent before.
Yeah.
But it often happens because our threads become familiar, and it's beyond language. And look at that, isn't that amazing? And then we went on to the next bit, and I said, what's the environment? And the next person that I asked said, oh, well, they're out in the desert, and it's on a cliff edge. And over the cliff, there is this branch, and in the branch, there is a nest. And the room went, oh. And I went, oh my God. You know? And everybody had the same thing. And it was, we went to lunch and nobody spoke. Like, I mean, it was the same story from everybody. It's never happened before or never happened since to me to that magical extent, but it does happen. And it talks to the way we can communicate without our words. If we're open enough, you know. And people had been working on body work and breath work and openness for the whole weekend, and then that happened. So it's very similar to, you know, kind of the beautiful, this moment needs these people, and this is right now, you know.
I'm also very much interested in neuroscience. When I look at these things, I look at them and say, these are real things that are happening.
Yeah.
And that means they must be in some way reflected in our bodies as well, not just our spirits. There's this wonderful thing that happens when two people are together and communicating. It's called neural coupling. And it means that your brain starts to vibrate at the same pattern as I do. One of the things they've learned about that is that if you were a tailor and we were speaking with each other and I was not, I would be picking up in ways that neither of us were aware of your skills as a tailor.
Yeah.
And so when it was time for me to learn that, I wouldn't learn it in that moment. But when I was ready to learn to be a tailor, I would have access to
like a little imprint.
Little imprints of, I know what to do next, even though we had never spoken about it. And that these skills and this knowledge passes between us just by the fact of us being interacting with each other. Even though it's never spoken.
I firmly believe we kind of train ourselves out of that. Yeah. Because when a baby is born, a baby doesn't know it's separate for at least 6 weeks.
Right, right.
So when the parent is gone, it's like, my world is coming to an end, because they don't know that the parent will come back in that, like, you know, you're kind of going, oh, that's a vulnerable time for the baby then. And can you wait for that to be over so the baby, you know, but actually it's also a very special time, because it is the time of imprinting. One of my very fond memories is my grandniece, my mother's great granddaughter, and she's sitting on my mother's knee, and my mother is singing and talking, not that I can hear, but I can hear that there's something passing into the back of the child's head. And I said, what are you doing? And she says, I'm putting the stories into the child. And I'm like, oh my God, look at the intelligence of that. You know, and how much of those kind of intelligences have we forgotten? You talked about Reiki earlier, and I remember when I was training to be a biodynamic therapist, and we were looking at the heat that you could move over your skin, you know, and that if you took your hand up higher, you could feel it, but more faintly now. And if you practiced it, the separation from your skin to your hand could become longer, and you could still feel the heat moving along on the receiving skin, you know, and how we played with one another. One of the great experiments was everybody was blindfolded, and we had to feel one another's heat from a distance. So you couldn't put hands on the person, but you could feel their heat from a distance. And then, still blindfolded, you had to put people back in the order of which you kind of felt the heat of the person, and without fail, we were all able to do it.
Yes.
It was amazing, you know. But we forget things like that.
We forget things, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Will we say goodbye from Cork?
And goodbye from New York, but only for a while, because we'll be back again with another episode. Absolutely.
We can't wait to see you on the Story Road one more time. And from this time till that, be safe on the Story Road.